Welcome to the Innovation Conversation, a podcast about innovators, both in business and real life. Hosted by myself, Ricardo Pascual, and Harry McDonough. This podcast is also sponsored by ODEF Tech. ODEF Tech is your premier software development partner. Make sure you check them out at odev.tech. The podcast is also sponsored by Notion.so. Notion is offering 6 months for free for new users. Make sure you check out our website, thestartupevents.co.uk, to redeem the software.
Hi, and welcome to another episode of the Innovation Conversation. Today we are joined by Dr. Georgia Fleet and Carla Southworth. Welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. Thank you for having us.
Should I say ladies? I'm not sure if that's a bit pretentious, but would you like to please go and introduce yourself to the audience?
So, my name is Georgia. I am the co-founder and CEO at Zonova. My background is primarily that I am a scientist. I've had a bit of a weird and wonderful background of different types of experiences. We founded Zonova back in 2023. We're really excited to be speaking with you about it today.
That's good. And Carla, what were you doing in Zonova?
Sorry, and I'm Carla. I have background in NHS and healthcare, 12 years working across various different sectors. Met Georgia a couple of years ago, and then the rest was history.
Interesting. So what does Zonova do?
So we are a medtech startup, and what we have developed is a novel antimicrobial technology that we incorporate into medical devices. So that's a bit of a mouthful, but effectively what we do is we make medical devices that are used every day in hospitals. So things like IV cannulas, catheters, endotracheal tubes, those types of medical devices that are associated with infections. We just reduce the risk of that by adding our novel antimicrobial technology into it.
Isn't that already I would assume you already have some protection in those things, or it's just plain plastic?
No, these devices are all just polymers. So they're all just, flexible plastic tubing. And these devices are used every day. They're really common, into the, billions used annually across all these different types of devices around the world. They have really high infection rates. The surface of the device itself provides a really nice environment for bacterial biofilms to grow. And basically, the longer they're in the body, the higher your chances are of that infection. So, with long-term intubated patients, for example, you see that infection risk go up quite significantly. And urinary catheters as well, especially the indwelling ones. I think there's a CDC, part of the CDC website that says, 75% of catheterized patients will experience urinary tract infection, so UTI.
That's horrible. 75% is super high.
Yeah, I think obviously in terms of the reporting and the data available, those figures do vary, and they vary across regions and different areas of the world as well. But yeah, it's a huge problem. And at the moment, the only solution is just to treat it with antibiotics. But obviously, as the antimicrobial resistance crisis worsens, we have fewer and fewer options of available effective antibiotics.
And what prompted you to come up with the idea?
Pardon?
What made you come up with the idea?
Oh, so this. How long and far back do you want me to go with this one?
We got plenty of time.
Okay, so this all really came about during my PhD. So I started my PhD in 2018, so pre-COVID, and I was actually supposed to be doing my PhD something on dental care or oral health care, but quickly found myself looking into hospital-acquired infections. So that is those types of infections that you get as a result of being in hospital. So, large portion of those are device related. And the one that really struck me actually was ventilator-associated pneumonia. So those are the infections associated with being on a ventilator. So that specifically is the endotracheal tube. So when you're intubated and you have that tube kind of here accessing the lungs, that is the tube that often gets pretty disgusting over the course of intubation with bacterial biofilms. And what I was reading was that because the nature of intubation provides this direct access into the lungs, you get really serious cases of pneumonia, and actually a really significant portion of patients that are ventilated die from these secondary infections and not from what they were put on the ventilator, in the first place for. And so for me, that was really shocking, and that's kind of what got me into this specific area of medical devices. and the associated infections. And then that was confirmed when I'd spoken to a critical care consultant at a hospital nearby. And he was saying that, he thinks actually his leading cause of death in his unit were as a result of these secondary infections. So, yeah, really huge problem. And it just seemed really crazy to me and completely unnecessary that you have these really high mortality rates from just being in hospital, and the devices that you have to use. Obviously not ventilating isn't an option either. If you're put on a ventilator, there's no other choice. So yeah, that's when I set out to make the tubing itself antimicrobial to try and reduce the risk of these infections, and ultimately, hopefully, better patient outcomes. So yeah, that was what my entire PhD was focused on. And effectively, I did it. We made, the royal we. I made an antimicrobial endotracheal tube, the ventilator tube. But as with a lot of things that come out of academia, it was really expensive and difficult to make. It was never going to be commercially viable to make this. Endotracheal tubes, all these types of medical devices are like one use, single use throwaway devices, so they have to be cheap. And yeah, putting this technology in was just not going to be that, and therefore you just wouldn't be able to commercialize it and scale it. So when I left my PhD, that was when I really focused on, okay, we're definitely onto something here in terms of there's a need, but how do we make that affordable? So yeah, that was basically how Zonova was born.
I was thinking about the stats, and that's actually really crazy. 75% of people intubated are going to get some type of infection. That's actually super high. I don't want to go to the hospital now anymore. Not that it's something that happens on a regular basis, getting intubated, but still, that's incredibly high.
Yeah, so I don't know the figures for intubation off the top of my head, and I think the figures for intubation are quite complicated, and especially when COVID came along, we had significantly more people being intubated, and so the figures are debated for that one. But yeah, the 75% figure was for the urinary catheters. And then for IV catheters, for example, again, you've got a device that sits, direct in the body, access to your blood stream, and the infections that you get that are typically associated with IVs, you can get phlebitis and inflammation, but also, sepsis, another really big, serious infection. And what the literature that I've read has shown is that, off the top of my head from memory, I think it was about 25% associated with infection in terms of your likelihood of getting an infection, but when you are immune compromised, so for example, if you are in critical care and you have that IV in, then your likelihood goes up to more towards the 50% end. And obviously, these are all in literature. Maybe I can put some sources or something below to add onto this. But yeah, so it's really problematic. And I think at the moment, the doctors and vets, because this runs across both human and animal healthcare, the only kind of tool that they have is, good clinical practice and, in terms of preventing infections, like washing your hands, X, Y, Z. But other than that, it's pretty much just antibiotics. So yeah, with antibiotics becoming less and less effective, we're going to end up in a really, really serious situation quite soon if the forecasts are correct.
Yeah, that's quite scary, actually. It brings me back to before they just found germs, right? That was a big issue because I had no idea what was causing so much mortality, and then they all of a sudden realized, ooh, there's a thing called germs. That's probably what's killing this many people, and to think that we still die from stuff like that because there's nothing like the stuff you guys are doing for the market. It's a bit crazy. So what you came up with this system, you found it in academia, and then you decided to launch a startup. How was that journey like?
Oh, the journey to starting the company, long and hard. So I've got notes going back on my phone from 2021 on terms of starting a company. So I think it was always back of mind, especially whilst I was doing my PhD. We didn't officially incorporate until the 8th of March, 2023, which was also International Women's Day. So that was nice. And yeah, so the journey to getting there, it was basically a year and a half of me bootstrapping, trying to get what work I could done in my spare bedroom. So we did do a few experiments in the spare bedroom with what we could order off Amazon. And what chemical companies would deliver to a residential location. And then we used that to get an initial US provisional patent filed, and then go from there and do our fundraise. So it was a year and a half of bootstrapping and me working, multiple part-time jobs on top of that. And then we closed our first pre-seed round last June. So that's June 2024.
And what's the market telling you so far?
Pardon?
What's the market telling you so far?
So the feedback that we've had from, doctors and veterinarians is that, this, if it works, is their main concern. If it works, would be, completely revolutionary in terms of how we prevent infections and, in general, just like infection control within hospitals.
Yes, I think the pressures, particularly in our healthcare system at the moment, are massive, and with recent announcements of further cuts and reorganisations, which takes up so much capacity and kind of the focus away from delivering clinical service to patients, any opportunity to try and reduce risk of infection, reduce hospital stays, reduce admissions in the first place, is very much welcome at the moment. So, yeah, as George said, if it works is always kind of the first feedback we get, but I think once we can, or not even convince me, once we can evidence that for them, I think the appetite is going to be huge and very much appreciated. And I think one of our concerns was whether people sort of really buying into how much AMR and the antimicrobial resistance crisis was kind of real and prevalent. I know a lot of people in frontline healthcare are just firefighting and having that kind of foresight further ahead to understand what's sort of coming. They don't always have the capacity to see, but I think we've really seen that people are becoming increasingly worried about the lack of availability of antibiotics and their efficacy. And at the moment, they can treat things and they can keep their patients alive. And I think the threat that really, really minor infections could now be the thing that means that they can't see that patient through to a kind of a good outcome is becoming very worrying. So, yeah, it's been pretty well received so far.
Yeah. And I think as well, like building on what Carla is saying, is that I think AMR and our ability to treat infections and prevent infections in the first place has such a huge knock-on effect to other diseases. So, for example, anything where you're immune compromised, such as cancer treatments, as one example, you are going to be at a significantly higher risk of infection, and therefore having complications as a result of those infections. And so, it's not just a case of antimicrobial resistance affecting one area of healthcare. It really will affect everything from cancer treatments to surgeries, even things like giving birth, like things that we really take for granted now, and have the potential to become really dangerous in the next literally 10, 20, 30 years.
Yeah, that's quite scary.
Yeah, the current projections, there was like a massive study or big projected figure that was put out that by 2050, antimicrobial resistance related mortality will be larger than cancer related mortality. So it's going to overtake and kind of be up there in terms of leading cause of death globally. And it also affects different parts of the world differently as well. So it's going to, really ramp up healthcare inequality. So it's a really huge problem. And then the last thing I wanted to say is, because we made a big comment about like if it works, is that we have great lab data. But obviously getting this into the market specifically for human healthcare, it's a longer road. What we do have coming up actually though are two really exciting pilots with veterinary hospitals in the UK. So we've got one of those currently being set up for urinary catheters and another one for IAB catheters. So we should have some real world data, we think by next year to give us an indication and initial insights into how they're working in the real world outside of the lab.
So how does it work? Do you manufacture yourself, or do you patented the technology and then you give it some to manufacturers to actually do it the way you think it should be done? So how does it work?
So I think, just going to say, can you move closer to the mic?
Sorry.
And then I think you said something about manufacturing.
Yes. So who does the manufacturing?
So at the moment, we would be manufacturing small batches and then, liaising with external partners for sterilization and packaging. And, that would be for the case for the pilots. But ultimately, we, in an ideal world, don't actually want to manufacture these on a larger scale. We don't want to be the manufacturer. I think the thing with our technology is that it's a technology that can be incorporated into existing medical devices. We are not reinventing the wheel when it comes to catheters, for example. So in an ideal world, what we would love to do is work and partner with existing device manufacturers and just put our technology effectively into their catheters to offer people an antimicrobial version of their favorite brands. And a huge reason for that is actually this is all about impact for us. We want to have the biggest impact possible. And so we think that, rather than trying to fight against the giants of the world in terms of medical devices, we would much prefer to work with them and just provide an antimicrobial version of what they're already offering, which we think will then increase the end user uptake as well. I think in terms of what the end users are seeing, it will be much easier. For example, if they see from their existing brand that there's just an antimicrobial version of what they're already using, we think that will then lead to more impact if more people have easy access to them.
And how complex is this actually? Do you need to go through a lot of regulation? Like, do you need to get FDA approval, for example, or how does it actually work?
Yeah, so the regulatory pathway, and I'm not a regulatory expert, so just going to put that out there right now, but it will depend by the sector and the region. So the veterinary sector will be completely different to the human sector. And then for the human sector, my understanding is that it goes by region. So for example, it would have to pass MHRA regulations for the UK, FDA for the US, and so on for each different region that the device would be sold in. But yeah.
And this is done by you or done by the company that actually manufactures the devices?
Pardon?
Is this done by your company or done by the company that actually manufactures the devices?
Yeah, so if we end up finding a partner to partner with prior to regulatory pathways, then great, and then we'd be more than happy for obviously the other company to take that forward with all of their expertise. Failing that, if we were going to be taking it to market, we would definitely have to get in external help in terms of going through those regulatory pathways. But so it definitely wouldn't be just us two trying to get through MHRA FDA regulatory pathways, and they are constantly evolving and changing at the moment as well, what with governments at the moment.
And how hard was it to explain this whole idea to investors?
You get a range of responses. I think it depends on people's kind of previous knowledge of AMR and understanding what that is. If they're not from a medical background, it can be quite difficult to kind of explain the gravity of the problem and how huge it can be and how impactful this kind of technology can be globally. I think once you're kind of over that first hurdle of understanding how big it is, people have been kind of really on board with the idea and very keen to be part of understanding it and kind of getting it to market. A kind of common question we get is, if it's so amazing, how has nobody invented it already? Which just makes me laugh every time, because I think you can say that about any invention ever. But yeah, it's been difficult, but I think once you get past that initial kind of understanding, people are so keen to kind of learn more and be part of it.
And I think we're improving as well. And we have a great set of angel investors and advisors, a growing advisory board, and each of them coming from very different backgrounds as well. And I think having their input in kind of what got them initially interested has been really valuable for us. I'd like to think I've definitely improved since 2 years ago, coming straight off the back of a PhD. But yeah, I think, as Carla said, I think one of the problems is that, as we've kind of discussed, is that AMR is so big. It's such a huge problem, and it affects so many different, it affects humans, animals, the environment. It's almost like too big for its own good. And so I think for us, it's been really trying to like make our messaging more like concise and to the point, because I think, it's a bit of an unwieldy.
Yeah. And I think because our solution is so simple as well, so because the problem is so massive, but then our technology and solution is so simple, that can be quite difficult for people to get their head around, I think, as well.
Would it have other applications apart from medical devices? I know, like you can put it on surfaces, so there's not any bacteria growing there or stuff like that. Is that a possibility, or even a need?
Yeah, there are a ton of other applications, and that actually now forms part of our pitch deck. But yeah, so I think medical devices for me, obviously, that's kind of what got me into all of this, and I think that's where one of the most significant impacts will be. These catheters and endotracheal tubes, orthopedic implants as well, huge problems with infections there as well. We think there are potential in dental applications. One that keeps coming up is also kids' toys, or like kids like soft play.
Makes sense, yeah. They get quite grimy, don't they? So yeah.
Yeah.
Breathing around for germs.
Yeah.
I was thinking like things like when you go on the tube and then you grab the handle because you need to grab the handle, otherwise you're gonna fall. I'm just thinking, is there any way that it looks less grimy, feels less grimy? Because that's like, for me, what's the most disgusting things on the planet is like, oh no, I need to touch this, but no. So I don't know. I always end up washing my hands a lot. But yeah. Okay, I can see.
The tube is particularly disgusting. I have noticed actually that some of the, I think it was during COVID actually, that some of the escalator bars that you hold onto, they have like this UV thing now where it kind of goes through like a UV light sterilization. But yeah, that would be an interesting one for sure.
Interesting. So literally the world is yours. I mean, the future is bright. You have multiple applications for this. And I was just thinking, if I'm running a hospital and you come over and say, actually, you know what, I can reduce your mortality rate by this much %. I'm like, oh, wow, that's quite impressive. And it's just by changing this little tiny thing. That's huge. Huge. Like, it's actually going to be massive. Yeah, wow.
Yeah, I think I'm definitely all about kind of like small, relatively easy to implement changes that could have the potential for a significant impact. I think research and startups and innovation in general needs innovation from all different aspects. But for me personally, I've never been about wanting to, create the next antibiotic or like develop the next antibiotic, for example. I am much more on the end of, this is, an area that we could have significant impact on, but it's a relatively small change, therefore easier to implement. So for me, I think that's definitely what it's all about, and that's where kind of my focus is directed at, rather than the kind of massive, the kind of more big, much wider targets.
And what was the worst day for you? Growing the company for both of you, obviously, Carla and Georgia. What was the worst day? How was that like? How did you manage to overcome the worst day you ever had in the company?
I'd say one of the biggest challenges we had when we went through our first raise was accepting so many no's before you get to a yes. I think they say something like you have to get through your first 100 no's before you'll get to a yes in investment. And I think when you've put your heart and soul into a company, and obviously you think it's the greatest idea in the world, and you get so many no's, it's really hard not to take that personally. And I think every time you get a no, you get feedback, and people will give feedback every time, and you're not ever going to be able to kind of have the perfect model that fits every person that you pitch it to. So I think it feels really hard at first, and you take that quite personally at the beginning. And then you kind of go on a journey where you start to understand that, not every no is a personal no, and that it's not going to be right for everybody. And sometimes it's right place, right time, and you grow and learn on that journey and kind of adapt. And then once you do get your first yes and somebody sort of starts to believe in you, it feels like the best feeling ever. So yeah, that was quite a journey to go on, I would say.
Yeah. And I think as well, in the same breath as that, keeping it real, is that bootstrapping journey, I maybe made the mistake of trying to do this right off the back of my PhD with absolutely no savings. And so just that period where, it was like a year and a half of very, very minimal income, because I was working, part-time jobs, but it was, I was obviously working on Zonova at the same time. There's only so many hours in the day. So there was a lot of, not being able to go out with friends, not being able to go out with my partner. Not, it was a year and a half of I'm sure my partner would echo this as well. A really, really hard year, because you've got mentally, all the millions of no's. And then just from a life perspective as well, just not really being able to do anything but kind of sit in it. That was really tough. And so maybe that's advice for everybody else. Don't be so silly to do it with no savings off the back of your lowly paid PhD. Would not recommend. So yeah, I think that personally was really, really hard. And post pre-seed round, I've obviously been able to pay myself like a basic salary, which has changed everything. And that was, we were really thankful that actually that was something that our investors brought up as well, because, ultimately they want us to be in this and focused and not, fighting for scraps. So yeah, that I think was a big challenge for me as well in starting this.
I can imagine. So what advice would you give to people just starting out, especially in your area?
Ooh, I think the best advice I would have liked to have heard back then was surround yourself. You'll never know the answers to everything, and that's okay. So surround yourself with the best team of people and advisors and people who've done it before, people who've made mistakes, people who are willing to share their experiences and their journeys, and people that you can trust in that, essentially. So keep your kind of ears open to all the advice you can take. Some of it will be with a pinch of salt, and some of it will be, some people will have a motive behind that. So you've kind of got to be a bit savvy about where it's coming from, but to try and surround yourself with people who have experience, because every single day in a startup, you'll be doing something that you haven't done before, that you have no experience in, and having people around you that you can reach out to, ask for advice from, and learn from has been absolutely invaluable for us.
Yeah, completely agree, completely echo that. And I think actually that's probably when it started to all change, is when we had a few different advisors or people that were either in startups or, we had legal advice as well. And that really began to kind of change the tides for us. And I think as well, it's hard if you are a medical sciencey focused company, because what we were finding was that it would be, we're too early. Obviously we're not an app. I can't just sit on my computer and release a product, sort of like, and obviously that's oversimplifying it. I don't want to be insulting to people developing software, but there's a lot more kind of like front end costs. We need to set up a lab, and we need to hire people, and we need a lot of legal advice, and that all costs a lot of money up front. And so it's hard, because you are going to be too early for a lot of people that, especially when you're looking at an app that might be generating millions in revenue, compared to your kind of like idea for a medical device that is going to take investors like 10 years to get their money back. It's quite clear which one's looking the better option to investors. I think for us it was, communicating the impact, getting to know us personally as well. I think we've heard from especially early stage investors, that they're investing in the people as much as they are like the company and the science and the idea. So yeah, I think those two are probably the biggest things.
And everything takes longer than you think.
So much longer than you think it will. Triple your time.
Yeah, I don't think most people realize that it's actually going to take a long time to get funding and to actually get started, isn't it?
It was so funny. I remember us literally sitting, registering the company, having a glass of Prosecco, celebrating, being like, this is going to be great. And we were like, yes, it will probably just close the round in like a couple months. Just random. Obviously. And there's a really funny graph, and it's basically kind of like the founder startup journey, where it's like you're super optimistic and everything seems like it's going well, and then it all kind of crashes and burns. And for us, it was like March. We were like, this is amazing. We've got so, it's exciting. We were doing like accelerators. And then basically we got like a really big no towards the end of the year. And we had other potential angels that were going to potentially invest off the back of this big no. Basically, we got the big no. Everything else fell apart. And then I spent 3 weeks in bed, horizontal, on the sofa, being like, what? Like, no. Had a bit of a crisis about it. And then January came around. Carla was like, get up, what you doing? And we got started again. And actually I'd say it was probably March again where everything really started kicking off seriously. We spent time like reformulating the business plan, reformulating the deck, completely kind of changing everything, getting back on our feet, and then out we go again. So yeah, it was a journey.
And then we got our first big yes.
Yeah.
So.
And how important was it to actually be able to bounce back ideas from one another?
Definitely. I do not know how I would, I don't know how you would do it alone, even just from a sanity point of view. Obviously, it really helps to have co-founders that are different in background, coming from different perspectives. You don't just want two people saying yes to each other. So yeah, really important.
Interesting. I always like to ask you this question, which is the last book you read or the most impactful book you read for both of you. What was it?
I'm not going to lie, Ricardo, I am not a reader. This is going to be really controversial. I am a podcast listener and I am a Real Housewives watcher.
Interesting. Which one? Because there's different ones, right? There's one in Belvedere Hills. There's another one in London or something like that, or
everywhere. Beverly Hills, Atlanta, Orange County. I could talk about this for
and what about
the
yourself,
important
Carl?
takeaway from that is do your taxes correctly. Do not commit tax fraud.
Interesting. Unexpected. And what about yourself?
No, I'm talking about.
And Carla, you also watch the same show, or
No.
I don't, but I'm also not an avid reader. I was, which is not a great answer, I know. I read a lot, and then when I did university, and when you're like forced to read a lot of what you've got to do for like your studying, I lost the love for reading. And then I think when you're kind of at a laptop all day, kind of plugging away at just getting your business off the ground, I just want to like zone out when I go home. So I listen to a podcast. I call it a podcast and stomp, which I do most of the time. So I'll go for a long walk and put a podcast on. But yeah,
Makes
it's
sense.
been a while since I've read an actual physical book.
Okay.
I mean, the answer I should have said is that I've been actually recommended lots of different books recently.
The Investable CEO or something. Yeah.
There's one about spin selling. I've been trying to learn more about deal negotiation, but yeah.
I mean, you can always pick up The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. Apparently, that's quite famous or quite popular nowadays. So,
Pardon?
there's a book called The Art of the Deal by Donald Trump. I think it was released in the 90s or something like that. Very good book, apparently, very effective. Now, as we get closer to the end of the podcast, if people want to reach out and find out more about the wonderful things you're doing, what's the best way of doing so?
You can find us on LinkedIn. I think we're under Zonova Tech. Or you can find me personally on LinkedIn or Carla on LinkedIn. And you can also get in touch through our website as well, www.zonovatech.com. And we also have Instagram, also at Zonova Tech. So yeah, I'd say those three are our main channels.
Sounds good. Carla and Georgia, it's been an absolute pleasure having you here. Thank you so much for your time.
Thank you for having us.
Thanks very much.
Thank you.
The podcast is also sponsored by Notion.so. Notion is offering 6 months for free for new users. Make sure you check out our website, thestartupevents.co.uk, to redeem this offer. This podcast is also sponsored by startupnetworks.co.uk. Startup Networks, it's an online forum where you can find all the resources you need to run your startup, from grants to investors to tips and tricks on how to be successful in your startup. This podcast is also sponsored by ODEV Tech. ODEV Tech is your premier software development partner. Make sure you check them out at odev.tech.